Tonight, officials of the CDC are debating how to distribute the vaccine, who gets it first, and on the basis of what criteria. That decision will, to some extent, determine who lives and who dies. It's a big decision, and it shouldn't be complicated. According to the CDC's own models, the way to save the most Americans is to give the vaccine to frontline healthcare workers first, and then to the elderly, meaning people over the age of 65. Older people are by far the most vulnerable, as we now know well. Every other age group has a survival rate of over 99.9%. That's why in Britain, authorities are getting the vaccine to the elderly as quickly as they can. But in this country, a panel of ideologues at the CDC has decided that the elderly should not be at the front of the line. The center's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices has made a different determination. And the reasoning is simple. Old people in this country are too white to save. Now that sounds shocking because it is shocking, but they put it in writing. The CDC's Vaccine Advisory Committee unanimously approved recommendations last month from a doctor called Kathleen Dooling. According to Dooling's presentation, it is true that more lives would be saved if the elderly received priority access to the vaccine. But here's the problem. Quote, racial and ethnic minority groups are underrepresented among adults aged 65 and older. Therefore, the elderly should not be a top priority. According to the CDC's panel, another group, those officially classified as, quote, non-healthcare essential workers, should get the vaccine first. Well, why is that? Quote, racial and ethnic minority groups are disproportionately represented in many essential industries, end quote. In other words, it's entirely racial. They're making the decision based on race. Kathleen Dooling's presentation concluded that doling out life-saving medicine on the basis of skin color would, quote, mitigate health inequities. Of course, it would kill people, and she effectively concedes that. But the people it would kill come from a disfavored race, so it's not a big deal. It's been a very long time since anyone close to what we would consider the mainstream has endorsed eugenics, and that's exactly what that is. It's eugenics. But suddenly it's everywhere. Earlier this month, the New York Times, supposedly our greatest newspaper, interviewed a leading expert on medical ethics and vaccination at the University of Pennsylvania. He's a man called Harold Schmidt. Here's how Harold Schmidt advised the CDC. Quote, older populations are whiter. Society is structured in a way that enables them to live longer. Instead of giving additional health benefits to those who already have more of them, we can start to level the playing field a bit. Level the playing field. That means intentionally causing people's deaths because they're the wrong color. When was the last time you heard someone say something like that out loud in this country? Probably not since around 1945. That's when we all agreed that letting certain people die because of their race was bad public policy, not to mention evil. But suddenly our leaders have forgotten that lesson. It's like the Second World War never happened. In the same New York Times piece that quotes Harold Schmidt, yet another doctor makes a similar point. His name is Mark Lipsitch. He's an epidemiologist at Harvard. Here's why he thinks teachers should not be included in the now favored category of non-healthcare essential workers. Quote, teachers have middle-class salaries, are very often white, and they have college degrees. In other words, wrong color, not essential. Is the hair on anyone else's arm standing up? What the hell is going on? Talk like that from the people in charge makes the population highly paranoid and fearful about the future, and it should. In California, the governor has already announced the state will distribute medicine based on how people look.
Experts in safety, as well as experts looking at equity and looking at the distribution from a geriatric perspective, and looking at distributions, again, along the spectrum of making sure black and brown communities disproportionately are benefited because of the impact they have felt disproportionately because of COVID-19.
So certain ethnicities will get the vaccine first because of their ethnicity, says the governor of California. And it doesn't matter if that policy winds up killing more people or is not based in science, because it's not based in science. In fact, maybe that's the point. It'll level the playing field. In Oregon, the head of the public health department, Rachel Banks, has made the same commitment. If you want the vaccine, you had better not be white. Quote, we have a variety of ways to ensure there's equitable distribution, both geographically and particularly focused on communities of color who've seen unfair disproportionate impact from COVID-19. To get a little more specific, Oregon's health authority has released a statement that promises that, quote, Black, Indigenous, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Pacific Islander, and tribal communities will have, quote, equitable access to vaccination, meaning first dibs. In a world like this, where even vaccines are distributed on the basis of skin color, it's no wonder that many have decided to transition to a new race. Why wouldn't they? It doesn't pay to be in your old race. In Oregon, a group of Slavic Americans has petitioned the state's coalition of communities of color for membership, and it was granted, so they're no longer white. Apparently, neither is Nancy Pelosi. She was one of the first people in the country to get the vaccine, so Pelosi is now a person of color as well as essential, which at this point are basically the same thing. That is the consensus now all over the country from our leaders. This is insanity. When you are planning to distribute life-saving medicines on the basis of race, not on the basis of science, but on the basis of race, you are by definition dividing the country more deeply and more permanently, really, than you could under any circumstances. Nothing is worse than that if you want a cohesive country. The case they're making, when you're the right color, you're essential. And that makes sense considering that increasingly your color is your essence. It's the most important thing about you. In this case, you can determine whether you live or die. That's the country they are creating. So is it any wonder that this vaccine rollout makes people nervous?